What you just watched is not a cutscene from a movie. That is a video game. That is Final Fantasy XVI. And here's the thing, that's not even the most impressive fight in it. In 2023, Square Enix released a game that split the Final Fantasy fanbase right down the middle. Half the community called it the boldest reinvention the series had ever attempted. The other half said they stripped out everything that made Final Fantasy what it was and handed the franchise to a different audience entirely. 3 years later, both sides still argue about it, which honestly tells you this game did something right, because nobody argues about games they don't care about. Final Fantasy XVI, made by the team behind Final Fantasy XVI's legendary comeback, producer Naoki Yoshida and director Hiroshi Takai. Rated M for the first time in franchise history, a game that looked at 35 years of JRPG tradition and said, we're going a different direction. Is it a masterpiece? Is it a betrayal? Or is it something more complicated than either of those takes? I went back to the full game, both DLCs included, to give you the honest answer in 2026. Let's get into it. To understand Final Fantasy XVI, you need to understand who made it and what they were trying to fix. The Creative Business Unit 3, the team that resurrected Final Fantasy XIV from one of the worst MMO launches in history, were handed the mainline series. That's not a small thing. Naoki Yoshida, Yoshi-P, is one of the most respected figures in the entire industry. He's the man who turned a disaster into arguably the best MMO ever made. And his approach to 16 was clear from day one. This is a story-first, character-driven, action-focused game for a mature audience. No random encounters, no turn-based combat, no traditional party mechanics. Full action combat, a single protagonist, and a narrative dark enough to earn that M rating with interest. Yoshida looked at what From Software had done for action RPGs, what God of War had done for cinematic storytelling in games, and made a conscious decision to position Final Fantasy in that space. Was that the right call? That's the question this whole game lives or dies on, and I'll tell you my honest take. But first, let's talk about what they built. The world is called Valisthea. It's a dying world. Massive crystalline structures called mother crystals have powered civilization for centuries, giving people access to magic called the ether. But the blight is spreading. A creeping decay that renders land barren, destroys crops, collapses kingdoms. Every nation on Valisthea is in a desperate race to control the remaining mother crystals before there's nothing left. Into this world, you play as Clive Rosfield, firstborn son of the Archduke of Rosaria. Not the dominant, that's his younger brother Joshua, who carries the Phoenix icon inside him. Clive's role is to serve and protect Joshua. And then one night, everything goes wrong in the worst possible way. I won't get specific because this game's opening act delivers one of the most brutal, gut-punch sequences in recent Final Fantasy history. What happens to Clive, what happens to his family, and what he becomes in the aftermath, that's the foundation the entire story is built on. Clive is one of the best protagonists this franchise has produced. He's not a blank slate, he's not a brooding edgelord. He's a man carved down by guilt and grief and rage, who finds purpose again through the people around him. Ben Starr's voice performance and the entire English dub is extraordinary. This is prestige TV-level acting in a video game. The supporting cast is exceptional too. Jill Warwick, Sid the Outlaw, Gav, Dion Lesage. These aren't NPCs that blend together. They're characters with real arcs, contradictions, and weight. Now, the criticism, and it's valid. The pacing in the mid-game is uneven. There are stretches of largely fetch quest-style side content that slow everything down. The side quests in the base game are honestly the weakest part of the writing. A lot of them are thin compared to the main story's quality. The DLC, Echoes of the Fallen and The Rising Tide, improved on this significantly with deeper, more substantial content. But the main narrative, the core of what this story is about, slavery, power, sacrifice, what it means to be free in a world that has decided your worth based on your birth, that lands. It lands hard. The ending of this game is one I still think about. Let's be real. This is where the debate lives. Final Fantasy XVI's combat is a full action system. No ATB gauge, no turn-based elements. You control Clive directly. Light attacks, heavy attacks, dodge, parry, and a suite of Eikon abilities mapped to a radial system. Clive can equip powers from multiple Eikons simultaneously and switch between them on the fly. You might open with Garuda's Wind Slash, chain into Phoenix's Fire Dive, stagger an enemy with Titan's Arm, then finish with Bahamut's Laser. At its best, this combat is genuinely spectacular. Learning the rhythm of it, timing dodges for precision dodge slow motion, staggering enemies to open them up for burst damage, juggling Eikon abilities to build maximum pressure rewards you. It feels like a character action game made by people who studied the genre deeply. The Eikon boss fights deserve their own conversation. These are sequences that abandon traditional combat entirely. Massive, cinematic, skill-defying fights where you're a god battling another god over a broken landscape. The Titan fight, the Bahamut encounter, the Phoenix versus Ifrit sequence. These are among the most visually and emotionally overwhelming moments in modern gaming. Full stop. Now, the honest critique. On story difficulty with all the accessibility rings equipped, the base game is genuinely too easy. You can almost button mash through regular encounters. The depth is there if you chase it, but the game doesn't force you to engage with it until you choose higher difficulties or start New Game Plus. The stagger system is the mechanical spine of every serious fight. Filling the stagger gauge on a boss opens a window for massive damage. But on lower difficulty, enemies stagger so fast that it removes tension. This is a game that rewards players who push themselves. If you play on action focus mode and actually learn the system, it's one of the most satisfying action combat experiences of this console generation. The second critique, exploration. The world design is mostly linear corridors with semi-open areas. There is no true open world. The areas between quest markers are often thin. If you're coming to this expecting a Valisthea to roam and discover, it's not that game. It's a character action game with RPG scaffolding, not an open world RPG with action combat. Knowing that going in matters. Final Fantasy XVI is a beautiful game. Not always in the technical sense, and that's worth being honest about. The PS5 version at launch had performance mode trade-offs, and in some environmental areas, the texture work is uneven. By the time the PC version arrived in 2024, optimization improved substantially. In 2026, on current hardware, the game runs cleanly. But the art direction is where this game genuinely excels. The world design team built Valisthea with an incredible sense of place. The Crystalline Dominion, a city literally built around and inside a mother crystal, is stunning. The contrast between the lush green territories that still have Aether access and the ashen, dead zones consumed by the Blight communicates the stakes of the story visually, without dialogue. The Eikon battles are the graphical showcase moments, when Ifrit and Phoenix clash against a burning sky, or when Bahamut tears open the atmosphere above Twinside. The particle effects, the scale, the lighting, it's a technical achievement that still impresses 3 years later. These sequences hold up. Character models are superb. Clive, Jill, Cid, the facial animation in cutscenes is detailed and expressive. The costume design draws on medieval European aesthetics and makes each faction visually distinct in a way that helps you track the political complexity of the story. The weakest visual area, the hideaway, your base of operations, and some of the caves/dungeon environments that repeat assets a bit too liberally. Nothing game-breaking, but visible. Overall, a game that won't always blow you away in screenshots, but in motion, in its best moments, genuinely breathtaking. Okay, let's address the actual debate. A lot of longtime Final Fantasy fans, and I count myself in that group, had a genuine identity crisis with this game. Where are the party members I control? Where's the turn-based strategy? Where's the job system, the deep equipment built, the exploration of a wide open world full of secrets? And look, those criticisms aren't wrong. If you come to 16 expecting Final Fantasy 7 or 9 or 10, you will be disappointed. This game is not that. What it is a linear, story-driven action game with light RPG systems, ability upgrades, gear with minor stat variants, some crafting. The depth lives in combat mastery and story investment, not in build variety or world exploration. The question is whether the trade-off was worth it. My answer, 3 years on, yes, with caveats. The story that Yoshida and his team wanted to tell required the structure. A true open world would have diluted the narrative momentum. A turn-based system would have broken the tonal seriousness they were chasing. The choices they made served the game they were trying to make. But, and this matters, it does mean Final Fantasy XVI is not a traditional Final Fantasy game. It's more accurate to say it's a great action game set in a Final Fantasy world. If you walk in knowing that, you'll have a much better time than if you walk in expecting something it was never trying to be. The DLC, especially the Rising Tide, added more complexity and some of the deeper exploration that the base game was missing. Worth playing. Here's what's interesting about where Final Fantasy XVI sits right now in 2026. When it launched in 2023, the JRPG landscape was already shifting. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade had shown that the franchise could reinvent its most beloved entry with an action system. But 16 went further. No safety net of nostalgia, no returning characters, a completely new world with a completely different set of rules. The game moved over 3 million units in its first week and was one of the best-selling PS5 titles of 2023. Critically, it landed around 87-88 on Metacritic, strong, but with a visible gap between professional reviews and a vocal portion of the player base who felt left behind. 3 years later, the conversation has settled into something more honest. The people who came in expecting a traditional JRPG and got something else have largely made peace with it, or moved on. And the people who met the game on its own terms have a real affection for it. What 16 did that matters? It proved the mainline series could take a full, committed creative risk. It wasn't a cautious, committee-designed middle ground game. It was someone's vision, Yoshida's, Takaya's, executed with conviction. In an era where massive AAA games often feel like they were designed to offend no one, that conviction is genuinely rare. It also wrote a protagonist and told a story about slavery and autonomy and sacrifice that had actual things to say. Not perfectly. The mid-game pacing problems are real, but the ambition was serious and the payoff was real. Whether it belongs in the top tier of Final Fantasy games is still debated, but whether it matters, whether it's worth your time, that answer is clearer. Final Fantasy XVI in 2026. Here's exactly who should play it. If you love cinematic, story-driven action games, God of War, Devil May Cry, The Witcher, and you've never played 16, this is your game. Go in with no expectations about what Final Fantasy should be, and you will have one of the best narrative gaming experiences available on PS5 or PC. If you're a longtime Final Fantasy fan who bounced off it in 2023, I'd say give it another shot, but adjust your frame. Don't fight what the game is. Play on a harder difficulty, skip the accessibility rings, engage with the combat system properly, and play the DLC. It's a different experience than you might remember. If you're a newcomer to the franchise entirely, this is actually a solid entry point. You need zero prior Final Fantasy knowledge. The world is self-contained and explained clearly, and it will show you what this franchise is capable of at its most ambitious. The weaknesses are real. Uneven pacing in the middle act, side quests that don't match the main story's quality, and RPG depth that some players will find unsatisfying. These aren't small complaints, and they're worth knowing. But the strengths, Clive Rosfield's arc, Masayoshi Soken's soundtrack, the Eikon battles, Ben Starr's performance, the ending, these are things you don't forget. Final Fantasy XVI is a flawed, bold, beautiful game that swung for something different and hit more than it missed. And in 2026, when so many games play it safe, that matters more than ever. That's the review. Drop a comment. Where do you rank 16 in the franchise? I'm genuinely curious where people land now that the dust has settled. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.